Good afternoon, pretty shiny peoples. As promised, we will finish this book today. So, don't get excited though, because this book has 463 pages, but we're going to keep climbing. The next book has 588. The book after that has 718. The book after that has 925. Book 6 will drop back down to 510. But book 7 will be 1031 pages. So don't get that excited. It is a long series. But we will finish book 2 today. So let's see. One sec. Sorry about that. I just got back from taking the dogs on a walk. So we just got back from a walk. And I did not know where I set my water. So I am so sorry, but give me just a moment and then we will finish this book. Okay, found it. 2 readings in one day. Fun stuff. I only hear the lisp every now and then now, so I guess maybe soon enough I'll be past it. Who knows? Hopefully, I don't have to have any more bone grafts, but we'll see. Anyway, Roland takes his medicine. Now, Jack Mort knew the gunslinger was here. If he had been another person, an Eddie Dean or an Odetta Walker, for instance, Roland would have held palaver with the man, if only to ease his natural panic and confusion at suddenly finding oneself shoved rudely into the passenger seat of the body one's brain had driven one's whole life. But because Mort was a monster, worse than Detta Walker ever had been or could be, he made no effort to explain or speak at all. He could hear the man's clamorings. "Who are you? What's happening to me?" but disregarded them. The gunslinger concentrated on his short list of necessities, using the man's mind with no compunction at all. The clamorings became screams of terror. The gunslinger went right on, disregarding them. The only way he could remain in this worm pit which was this man's mind was to regard him as no more than a combination atlas and encyclopedia. Mort had all the information Roland needed. The plan he made was rough, but rough was often better than smooth. When it came to planning, there were no creatures in the universe more different than Roland and Jack Mort. When you planned rough, you allowed room for improvisation, and improvisation at short notice had always been one of Roland's strong points. A fat man with lenses over his eyes, like the bald man who had poked his head into Mort's office 5 minutes earlier. It seemed that in Eddie's world many people wore these, which his Mort Cyclopedia identified as glasses, got into the elevator with him. He looked at the briefcase in the hand of the man who he believed to be Jack Mort, and then at Mort himself. "Going to see Dorfman, Jack?" The gunslinger said nothing. "If you think you can talk him out of subleasing, I can tell you it's a waste of time," the fat man said. Then blinked as his colleague took a quick step backward. The door of the little box closed, and suddenly they were falling. He clawed at Mort's mind, ignoring the screams, and found this was all right. The fall was controlled. "If I spoke out of turn, I'm sorry," the fat man said. The gunslinger thought, "This one is afraid too." "You've handled the jerk better than anyone else in the firm, that's what I think." The gunslinger said nothing. He waited only to be out of this falling coffin. "I say so, too," the fat man continued eagerly. Why, just yesterday I was at lunch with— Jack Mort's head turned, and behind Jack Mort's gold-rimmed glasses, eyes that seemed somehow different shade of blue than Jack's eyes had ever been before, stared at the fat man. "Shut up," the gunslinger said tonelessly. Color fell from the fat man's face, and he took 2 quick steps backwards. His flabby buttocks smacked the fake wood panels at the bottom of the little moving coffin, which suddenly stopped. The doors opened, and the gunslinger, wearing Jack Mort's body like a tight-fitting set of clothes, stepped out with no look back. The fat man held his finger on the door open button of the elevator and waited inside until Mort was out of sight. Always did have a screw loose, the fat man thought, but this could be serious. This could be a breakdown. The fat man found that the idea of Jack Mort tucked safely away in a sanitarium somewhere was very comforting. The gunslinger wouldn't have been surprised. Somewhere between the echoing room which his Mortcyclopedia identified as a lobby, to wit, a place of entry and exit from the offices which filled this sky tower, and the bright sunshine of the street, his Mortcyclopedia identified this street as both 6th Avenue and Avenue of the Americas. The screaming of Roland's host stopped. Mort had not died of fright. The gunslinger felt with a deep instinct which was the same as knowing that if Mort died, their cause would be expelled forever into that void of possibility which lay beyond all physical worlds. Not dead, fainted. Fainted at the overload of terror and strangeness, as Roland himself had done upon entering the man's mind and discovering its secrets and crossing of destinies too great to be coincidence. He was glad Mort had fainted, as long as the man's unconsciousness hadn't affected Roland's access to the man's knowledge and memories, and it hadn't. He was glad to have him out of the way. The yellow cars were public conveyances called taxis, or cabs, or hacks. The tribes which drove them, the Mortcyclopedia told him, were 2, Spics and Mockies. To make one stop, you held your hand up like a pupil in a classroom. Roland did this, and after several taxis, which were obviously empty save for the driver, had gone by him, he saw that these had signs which read, "Off duty." Since these were great letters, the gunslinger didn't need Mort's help. He waited, then put his hand up again. This time, the taxi pulled over. The gunslinger got into the back seat. He smelled old smoke, old sweat, old perfume. It smelled like a coach in his own world. "Where to, my friend?" the driver asked. Roland had no idea if he was of the Spics or the Mockies tribe, but had no intention of asking. It might be impolite in this world. "I'm not sure," Roland said. "This ain't no encounter group, my friend. Time is money." "Tell him to put his flag down," the Mortcyclopedia told him. "Put your flag down," Roland said. "That ain't rolling nothing but time," the driver replied. "Tell him you'll tip him $5, the Mortcyclopedia advised. "I'll tip you $5, Roland said. "Let's see it," the cabbie replied. "Money talks, bullshit walks." "Ask him if he wants his money or if he wants to go fuck himself," the Mortcyclopedia advised instantly. "Do you want the money or do you want to go fuck yourself?" Roland asked in a cold, dead voice. The cabbie's eyes glanced apprehensively into the rearview mirror for just a moment, and he said no more. Roland consulted Jack Mort's accumulated store of knowledge more fully this time. The cabbie glanced up again. Quickly, during the 15 seconds his fare spent simply sitting there with his head slightly lowered and his left hand spread across his brow as if he had an Excedrin headache, the cabbie had decided to tell the guy to get out or he'd yell for a cop when the fare looked up and said mildly, "I'd like you to take me to 7th Avenue and 49th Street. For this trip, I will pay you $10 over the fare on your taxi meter, no matter what your tribe." A weirdo. The driver, a wasp from Vermont trying to break into showbiz, thought, but maybe a rich weirdo. He dropped the cab into gear. "We're there, buddy," he said, and pulling into traffic, he added mentally, "And the sooner, the better." Improvise. That was the word. The gunslinger saw the blue and white parked down the block when he got out, that read police as posse without checking Mort's store of knowledge. Two gunslingers inside, drinking something. Coffee, maybe, from white paper glasses. Yeah, gunslingers, yes, but they looked fat and lax. He reached into Jack Mort's wallet, except it was much too small to be a real wallet. A real wallet was almost as big as a purse and could carry all of a man's things if he wasn't traveling too heavy, and gave the driver a bill with the number 20 on it. The cabbie drove away fast. It was easily the biggest tip he'd make that day, but the guy was so freaky he felt he had earned every cent of it. The gunslinger looked at the sign over the shop. Clement's Guns and Sporting Goods, it said. Ammo, fishing tackle, official facsimiles. He didn't understand all of the words, but one look in the window was all it took for him to see Mort had brought him to the right place. There were wristbands on display, badges of rank, and guns. Rifles mostly, but pistols as well. They were chained, but that didn't matter. He would know what he needed when, if he saw it. Roland consulted Jack Mort's mind, a mind exactly sly enough to suit his purposes, for more than a minute. One of the cops in the blue and white elbowed the other. Now that, he said, is a serious comparison shopper. His partner laughed. Oh, God, he said in an effeminate voice as the man in the business suit and gold-rimmed glasses finished his studies of the merchandise on display and went inside. I think he just decided on the lavender handcuffs. The first cop choked on a mouthful of lukewarm coffee and sprayed it back into the styrofoam cup in a gust of laughter. A clerk came over almost at once and asked if he could be of help. I wonder, the man in the conservative blue suit replied, if you have a paper. He paused, appeared to think deeply, and then looked up. A chart, I mean, which shows pictures of revolvers and ammunition. You mean a caliber chart? The clerk asked. The customer paused, then said yes. Yes, my brother has a revolver. I have fired it, but it's been a good many years. I think I will know the bullets if I see them. Well, you may think so, the clerk replied, but it can be hard to tell. Was it a 22, a 38, or maybe... If you have a chart, I'll know, Roland said. Just a sec. The clerk looked at the man in the blue shirt doubtfully for a moment, then shrugged. Fuck, the customer was always right, even when he was wrong. If he had enough dough to pay, that was. Money talked, bullshit walked. I got a shooter's Bible. Maybe that's what you ought to look at. Yes, he smiled. Shooter's Bible. It was a notable name for a book. The man rummaged under the counter and brought out a well-thumbed volume as thick as any book the gunslinger had ever seen in his real life, and yet this man seemed to handle it as if it were no more valuable than a handful of stones. He opened it on the counter and turned it around. Take a look. Although it's been years, you're shooting in the dark. He looked surprised, then smiled. Pardon my pun. Roland didn't hear. He was bent over the book, studying pictures which seemed almost as real as the thing they represented. Marvelous pictures, the Mortcypedia identified as photographs. He turned the page slowly. No, no, no. He had almost lost hope when he saw it. He looked up at the clerk with such blazing excitement that the clerk felt a little afraid. There, he said. There, right there. The photograph he was tapping was one of the Winchester 45 pistol shells. It was not exactly the same as his own shells because it hadn't been hand-thrown or hand-loaded, but he could see without even consulting the figures, which would have meant almost nothing to him anyway, that it would chamber and fire from his guns. Well, all right. I guess you found it, the clerk said. But don't cream your jeans, fella. I mean, they're just bullets. You have them? Sure. How many boxes do you want? How many in a box? 50. The clerk began to look at the gunslinger with real suspicion. If the guy was planning to buy shells, he must know he'd have to show a permit to carry photo ID, no PC, no ammo, not for handguns. It was the law in the borough of Manhattan. And if this dude had a handgun permit, how come he didn't know how many shells came in a standard box of ammo? 50. Now the gunslinger was staring at him with slack-jawed surprise. He was off the wall, all right. The clerk edged a bit to his left, a bit nearer the cash register, and, not so coincidentally, a bit nearer to his own gun. .357 mag, which he kept fully loaded in a spring clip under the counter. 50, the gunslinger repeated. He had expected 5, 10, perhaps as many as a dozen, but this? This? How much money do you have? He asked the Mortcypedia. The Mortcypedia didn't know, not exactly, but thought that there was at least $60 in his wallet. And how much does a box cost? It would be more than $60, he supposed, but the man might be persuaded to sell him part of a box, or $17.50, the clerk said. But Jack Mort was an accountant, and this time there was no waiting. Translating the answer came simultaneously. 3, the gunslinger said. 3 boxes. He tapped the photograph of the shells with one finger. 150 rounds, ye gods. What a mad storehouse of riches this world was. The clerk wasn't moving. You don't have that many? The gunslinger said. He felt no real surprise. It had been too good to be true. A dream. Oh, I got Winchester 45s. I got 45s up the kazoo. The clerk took another step to the left, a step closer to the cash register and the gun. If the guy was a nut, something the clerk expected to find out for sure any second now, he was going to be a nut with an extremely large hole in his midsection. I got 45 ammo up the old yin-yang. What I want to know, mister, is if you got the card. Card? A handgun permit with a photo. I can't sell you handgun ammo unless you can show me one. If you want to buy ammo with the PC, you're going to have to go up to Westchester. The gunslinger stared at the man blankly. This was all gabble to him. He understood none of it. His Mortcypedia had some vague notion of what the man meant, but Mort's ideas were too vague to be trusted in this case. Mort had never owned a gun in his life. He did the nasty work in other ways. The man sidled another step to the left, without taking his eyes from his customer's face, and the gunslinger thought, he's got a gun. He expects me to make trouble. Or maybe he wants me to make trouble. Wants an excuse to shoot me. Improvise. He remembered the gunslingers sitting in their blue and white carriage down the street. Gunslingers, yes, peacekeepers. Men charged with keeping the world from moving on. But these had looked, at least on a passing glance, to be nearly as soft and unobservant as everyone else in the world of lotus eaters. Just 2 men in uniforms and caps slouched down in the seats of their carriage drinking coffee. He might have misjudged. He hoped for all their sakes that he had not. Oh, I understand, the gunslinger said, and drew an apologetic smile on Jack Mort's face. I'm sorry. I guess I haven't kept track of how much the world has moved on, changed since I last owned a gun. No harm done, the clerk said, relaxing minutely. Maybe the guy was all right. Or maybe he was pulling a gag. I wonder if I could look at that cleaning kit. Roland pointed to a shelf behind the clerk. Sure. The clerk turned to get it, and when he did, the gunslinger removed the wallet from Mort's inside jacket pocket. He did this with the flickering speed of a fast draw. The clerk's back was to him for less than 4 seconds, but when he turned back to Mort, the wallet was on the floor. It's a beaut, the clerk said, smiling, having decided the guy was okay after all. Hell, he knew how lousy you felt when you made a horse's ass of yourself. He had done it in the Marines enough times, and you don't need a goddamn permit to buy a cleaning kit either. Ain't freedom wonderful? Yes, the gunslinger said seriously, and pretended to look closely at the cleaning kit, although a single glance was enough to show him that it was a shoddy thing in a shoddy box. While he looked, he carefully pushed Mort's wallet under the counter with his foot. After a moment, he pushed it back with a passable show of regret. I'm afraid I have to pass. All right, the clerk said, losing interest abruptly. Since the guy wasn't crazy and was obviously a looker, not a buyer, their relationship was at an end. Bullshit walks. Anything else? his mouth asked while his eyes told Blue Suit to get out. No, thank you. The gunslinger walked out with a look back. Mort's wallet was deep under the counter. Roland had set his own honey pot. Officers Carl DeLevin and George O'Meara had finished their coffee and were about to move on when the man in the blue suit came out of Clements, which both cops believed to be a powder horn, police slang for a legal gun shop which sometimes sells guns to independent stick-up men with proven credentials and which does business, sometimes in bulk, to the mafia, and approached their squad car. He leaned down and looked in the passenger side window at Miera. O'Meara expected the guy to sound like a fruit, probably as fruity as the routine about the lavender handcuffs had suggested, but a poof all the same. Guns aside, Clements did a lively trade in handcuffs. These were legal in Manhattan, and most of the people buying them weren't amateur Houdinis. The cops didn't like it, but when had the cops thought on any given subject ever changed things? The buyers were homos with a little taste for S&M, but the man didn't sound like a fag at all. His voice was flat and expressionless, polite, but somehow dead. The tradesman in there took my wallet, he said. Who? O'Meara straightened up fast. They had been itching to bust Justin Clements for a year and a half. If it could be done, maybe the two of them could finally swap these blue suits for detective badges. Probably just a pipe dream. This was too good to be true, but just the same. The tradesman? A brief pause. The clerk? O'Meara and Carl DeLevin exchanged a glance. Black hair? DeLevin asked, on the stocky side. Again, there was the briefest pause. Yes. His eyes were brown, small scar under one of them. There was something about the guy. O'Meara couldn't put his finger on it then, but remembered later on, when there weren't so many other things to think about, the chief of which, of course, was the simple fact that the gold detective's badge didn't matter. It turned out that just holding on to the jobs they had would be a pure brassy ass miracle. But years later, there was a brief moment of epiphany when O'Meara took his two sons to the Museum of Science in Boston. They had a machine there, a computer that played tic-tac-toe, and unless you put your X in the middle square on the first move, the machine fucked you over every time. But there was always a pause as it checked its memory for all possible gambits. He and his boys had been fascinated, but there was something spooky about it. And then he remembered Blue Suit. He remembered because Blue Suit had that same fucking habit. Talking to him had been like talking to a robot. Delavan had no such feeling, but 9 years later, when he took his own son, then 18 and about to start college, to the movies one night, Delavan would rise unexpectedly to his feet about 39 minutes into the feature and scream, It's him! That's him! That's the guy in the fucking blue suit! The guy who was at Somebody would shout, Down in the front! But he needn't have bothered. Delavan, 70 pounds overweight and a heavy smoker, would be struck by a fatal heart attack before the complainer even got the second word. The man in the blue suit, who approached the cruiser that day, had told him about his stolen wallet. Didn't look like the star of a movie, but the dead delivery of words had been the same. So had been the somehow relentless, yet graceful way he moved. The movie, of course, had been The Terminator. The cops exchanged a glance. The man blue suit was talking about wasn't Clements, but almost as good. Fat Johnny, Holden Clements's brother-in-law. But to have done something as totally dumbass as simply stealing a guy's wallet would be right up that gink's alley, O'Meara's mind finished, and he had to put a hand to his mouth to cover a momentary little grin. Maybe you better tell us exactly what happened, Delavan said. You can start with your name. Again, the man's response struck O'Meara as a little wrong, a little offbeat. In this city, where it sometimes seemed that 70% of the population believed go fuck yourself was American for have a nice day, he would have expected the guy to say something like, Hey, that SOB took my wallet. Are you going to get it back for me, or are we going to stand out here playing 20 questions? But there was this nicely cut suit, the manicured fingernails, a guy maybe used to dealing with bureaucratic bullshit. In truth, George O'Meara didn't care much. The thought of busting Fat Johnny Holden and using him as a lever on Arnold Clement made O'Meara's mouth water. For one dizzy moment, he even allowed himself to imagine using Holden to get Clements and Clements to get one of the really big guys. That Wop Balazar, for instance. Or maybe Janelli. That wouldn't be too tacky. Not too tacky at all. My name is Jack Mort, the man said. Delavan had taken a butt-warped pad from his back pocket. Address? That slight pause. Like the machine. O'Meara thought again. A moment of silence, then an almost audible click. 409 Park Avenue South. Delavan jotted it down. Social Security number. After another slight pause, Mort recited it. Want you to understand, I gotta ask you these questions for identification purposes. If the guy did take your wallet, it's nice if I can say you told me certain stuff before I take it into my possession, you understand? Yes. Now there was the slightest hint of impatience in the man's voice. It made O'Meara feel a little bit better about him somehow. Just don't drag it out any more than you have to. Time passes and things have a way of happening. Yeah, I dig. Things have a way of happening, the man in the blue suit agreed. Yes. Do you have a photo in your wallet that's distinctive? A pause. Then a picture of my mother taken in front of the Empire State Building. On the back is written, "It was a wonderful day and a wonderful view. Love, Mom." Delavan jotted furiously, then snapped his notebook closed. Okay, that should do it. Only one other thing I'll be able to have you write your signature if we get your wallet back and compare it with the signature on your driver's license, credit card, stuff like that, okay? Roland nodded. Although part of him understood that although he could draw on Jack Mort's memories and knowledge of the world as much as he needed, he hadn't a chance in hell of duplicating Mort's signature with Mort's conscience absent, as it was now. Tell us what happened. I went in to buy shells for my brother. He has a .45 Winchester revolver. The man asked me if I had a permit to carry. I said, of course. He has to see it. Pause. I took out my wallet. I showed him. Only when I turned my wallet around to do that showing, he must have seen there were quite a few, slight pause, 20s in there. I am a tax accountant. I have a client named Dorfman who just won a small tax refund after an extended litigation. The sum was only $800, but this man, Dorfman, is, pause, the biggest prick we handle, pause. Pardon my pun. O'Meara ran the man's last few words back through his head and suddenly got it. The biggest prick we handle. Not bad. He laughed. Thoughts of robots and machines that played tic-tac-toe went out of his mind. The guy was real enough, just upset and trying to hide it by being cool. Anyway, Dorfman wanted cash. He insisted on cash. You think Fat Johnny got a look at your client's dough? Delavan said. He and O'Meara got out of the blue and white. Is that what you call the man in the shop? Oh, we call him worse than that on occasion, Delavan said. What happened after you showed him your PC, Mr. Mort? He asked for a closer look. I gave him my wallet, but he didn't look at the picture. He dropped it on the floor. I asked him what he did that for. He said that was a stupid question. Then I told him to give me back my wallet. I was mad. I bet you were. Although looking at the man's dead face, Delavan thought you'd never guess this man could get mad. He laughed. I started to come around the counter and get it. That was when he pulled the gun. They had been walking toward the shop. Now they stopped. They looked excited, rather than fearful. Gun? O'Meara asked, wanting to be sure he had heard right. It was under the counter, by the cash register, the man in the blue shirt said. Roland remembered the moment when he had almost junked his original plan and gone for the man's weapon. Now he told these gunslingers why he hadn't. He wanted to use them, not get them killed. I think it was in a Docker's clutch. A what? O'Meara asked. A longer pause this time. The man's forehead wrinkled. I don't know exactly how to say it. The thing you put your gun into. No one can grab it but you unless you know how to push a spring clip. Delavan said. Holy shit! Another exchange of glances between the partners. Neither wanted to be the first to tell this guy that Fat Johnny had probably harvested the cash from his wallet already, shucked his buns out the back door, and tossed it over the wall of the alley behind the building. But a gun in a spring clip? That was different. Robbery was a possible, but all at once concealed weapons charge looked like a sure thing. Maybe not as good, but a foot in the door. What then? O'Meara asked. Then he told me I didn't have a wallet. He said, pause, that I got my pocket picked, on the street, and I'd better remember it if I wanted to stay healthy. I remembered seeing a police car parked up the block, and I thought you might still be here, so I left. Okay, Delavan said. Me and my partner are going in first, and fast. Give us about a minute, a full minute, just in case there's some trouble. Then come in, but stand by the door. Do you understand? Yes. Okay, let's bust this motherfucker. The two cops went in. Roland waited 30 seconds and then followed them. Fat Johnny Holden was doing more than protesting. He was bellowing. Guy's crazy. Guy comes in here, doesn't even know what he wants. Then when he sees it in the shooter's Bible, he don't know how many comes in a box, how much they cost, and what he says about me wanting a closer look at his PC is the biggest pile of shit I've ever heard, because he doesn't have no permit to. Fat Johnny broke off. There he is. There's the creep, right there. I see you, buddy. I see your face. Next time you see mine, you're gonna be fucking sorry. I guarantee you that. I fucking guarantee. You don't have this man's wallet? O'Meara asked. You know I don't have his wallet. You mind if we take a look behind the display case? Delavan countered, just to be sure. Jesus fucking jumped up Christ on a pony. The case is glass. You see any wallets there? No, not there. I meant here, Delavan said, moving toward the register. His voice was a cat's purr. At this point, in a chrome steel reinforcing strip almost 2 feet wide ran down the shelves of the case. Delavan looked back at the man in the blue suit, who nodded. I want you guys out of here right now, Fat Johnny said. He had lost some of his color. You come back with a warrant. That's different. But for now, I want you the fuck out. Still a free fucking country, you know. Hey, quit that! O'Meara was peering over the counter. That's illegal, Fat Johnny was howling. That's fucking illegal. The Constitution, my fucking lawyer. You get back on your side right now, or... I just wanted a closer look at the merchandise, O'Meara said mildly, on account of the glass in your display case is so fucking dirty. That's why I looked over. Isn't it, Carl? True shit, buddy, Delavan said solemnly. And look what I found. Roland heard a click, and suddenly the gunslinger in the blue uniform was holding an extremely large gun in his hand. Fat Johnny had finally realized he was the only person in the room who would tell a story that differed from the fairy tale just told by the cop who had taken his mag turned sullen. I got a permit, he said. To carry? Delavan asked. Yeah. To carry concealed? Yeah. This gun registered? O'Meara asked. It is, isn't it? Well, I might have forgot. Might be it's hot and you forgot that, too. Fuck you. I'm calling my lawyer. Fat Johnny started to turn away. Delavan grabbed him. Then there's the question of whether or not you got a permit to conceal a deadly weapon in a spring clip device, he said in the same soft, purring voice. That's an interesting question, because so far as I know, the city of New York doesn't issue a permit like that. The cops were looking at Fat Johnny. Fat Johnny was glaring back at them, so none of them noticed Roland turn the sign hanging in the door from opened to closed. Maybe we could start to resolve this matter if we could find the gentleman's wallet, O'Meara said. Satan himself could not have lied with such genial persuasiveness. Maybe he just dropped it, you know. I told you, I don't know nothing about the guy's wallet. Guy's out of his mind. Roland bent down. There it is, he remarked. I can just see it. He's got his foot on it. That was a lie, but Delavan, whose hand was still on Fat Johnny's shoulder, shoved the man back so rapidly that it was impossible to tell if the man's foot had been there or not. It had to be now. Roland glided silently toward the counter as the two gunslingers bent over to peer under the counter. Because they were standing side by side, this brought their heads close together. Omier still had the gun the clerk had kept under the counter in his right hand. God damn, it's there, Delavan said excitedly. I see it. Roland snapped a quick glance at the man they had called Fat Johnny, wanting to make sure he was not going to make a play. But he was only standing against the wall, pushing against it actually, as if wishing he could push himself into it. With his hands hanging at his sides and his eyes great wounded O's, he looked like a man wondering how come his horoscope hadn't told him to beware this day. No problem there. Yeah, O'Meara replied gleefully. The two men peered under the counter, hands on uniformed knees. Now, O'Meara left his knee and he reached out to snag the wallet. I see it too. Roland took one final step forward. He cupped Delavan's right cheek in one hand, O'Meara's left cheek in the other, and all of a sudden, a day Fat Johnny Holden believed had to have hit rock bottom got a lot worse. The spook in the blue suit brought the cops' heads together hard enough to make a sound like rocks wrapped in felt colliding with each other. The cops fell in a heap. The man in the gold-rimmed specs stood. He was pointing the 357 mag at Fat Johnny. The muzzle looked big enough to hold a moon rocket. We're not going to have any trouble, are we? The spook asked in his dead voice. No, sir, Fat Johnny said at once. Not a bit. Stand right there. If your ass loses contact with that wall, you're going to lose contact with your life as you have always known it. You understand? Yes, sir, Fat Johnny said. I sure do. Good. Roland pushed the two cops apart. They were both still alive. That was good. No matter how slow and unobservant they might be, they were gunslingers, men who had tried to help a stranger in trouble. He had no urge to kill his own. But he had done it before, hadn't he? Yes. Had not Elaine himself, one of his sworn brothers, died under Roland and Cuthbert's own smoking guns? Without taking his eyes from the clerk, he felt under the counter with the toe of Jack Mort's Gucci loafer. He felt the wallet. He kicked it. It came spinning out from beneath the counter on the clerk's side. Fat Johnny jumped and shrieked like a goosey girl who spies a mouse. His ass actually did lose contact with the wall for a moment, but the gunslinger overlooked it. He had no intention of putting a bullet in this man. He would throw the gun at him and play him with it before firing a shot. A gun as absurdly big as this would probably bring half the neighborhood. Pick it up, the gunslinger said, slowly. Fat Johnny reached down, and as he grasped the wallet, he farted loudly and screamed. With faint amusement, the gunslinger realized he had mistaken the sound of his own fart for a gunshot, and this time of dying had come, and his time of dying had come. When Fat Johnny stood up, he was blushing furiously. There was a large wet patch on the front of his pants. Put the purse on the counter. Wallet, I mean. Fat Johnny did it. Now the shells. Winchester 45s. And I want to see your hands every second. I have to reach into my pocket for my keys. Roland nodded. His Fat Johnny first unlocked and then slid open the case with the stacked cartons of bullets inside. Roland cogitated. Give me 4 boxes, he said at last. He could not imagine needing so many shells, but the temptation to have them was not to be denied. Fat Johnny put the boxes on the counter. Roland slid one of them open, but was still hardly able to believe it wasn't a joke or a sham. But they were bullets, all right. Clean, shining, unmarked, never fired, never reloaded. He held one up to the light for a moment, then put it back in the box. Now take out a pair of those wristbands. Wristbands? The gunslinger consulted the Mortcypedia. Handcuffs. Mister, I don't know what you want. The cash registers. Do what I say, now. Christ, this ain't never going to end, Fat Johnny's mind moaned. He opened another section of the counter and brought out a pair of cuffs. Key? Roland asked. Fat Johnny put the key to the cuffs on the counter. It made a small click. One of the unconscious cops made an abrupt snoring sound, and Johnny uttered a wee screech. Turn around, the gunslinger said. You ain't gonna shoot me, are you? Say you won't. Ain't, Roland said tonelessly, as long as you turn around right now. If you don't do that, I will. Fat Johnny turned around, beginning to blubber. Of course, the guy said he wasn't going to, but the smell of mob hit was going to get too strong to ignore. He hadn't even been skimming that much. His blubbers became choked wails. Please, mister, for my mother's sake, don't shoot me. My mother's old. She's blind. She's cursed with a yellow gut, son, the gunslinger said dourly. Wrists together. Muling, wet pants sticking to his crotch, Fat Johnny put them together. In a trice, the steel bracelets were locked in place. He had no idea how the spook had gotten over or around the counter so quickly, nor did he want to. Stand there and look at the wall until I tell you it's all right to turn around. If you turn around before then, I'll kill you. Hope lighted Fat Johnny's mind. Maybe the guy didn't mean to hit him after all. Maybe the guy wasn't crazy, just insane. I won't. Swear to God. Swear before all of his holy saints. Swear before all of his angels. Swear before all of his ark. I swear if you don't shut up, I'll put a slug through your neck, the spook said. Fat Johnny shut up. It seemed to him that he stood facing the wall for an eternity. In truth, it was about 20 seconds. The gunslinger knelt, put the clerk's gun on the floor, took a quick look to make sure the maggot was being good, then rolled the other two onto their backs. Both were good and out, but not dangerously hurt, Roland judged. They were both breathing regularly. A little blood trickled from the ear of the one called Delavan, but that was all. He took another quick glance at the clerk, then unbuckled the gunslinger's gun belts and stripped them off. Then he took off Mort's blue suit coat and buckled the belts on himself. They were the wrong guns, but it still felt good to be packing iron again. Damned good. Better than he would have believed. 2 guns, one for Eddie and one for Odetta, when and if Odetta was ready for a gun. He put on Jack Mort's coat again, dropped 2 boxes of shells into the right pocket and 2 into the left. The coat, formerly impeccable, now bulged out of shape. He picked up the clerk's .357 mag and put the shells in his pants pocket. Then he tossed the gun across the room. When it hit the floor, Fat Johnny jumped, uttered another wee shriek, and squirted a little more warm water in his pants. The gunslinger stood up and told Fat Johnny to turn around. When Fat Johnny got another look at the geek in the blue suit and the gold-rimmed glasses, his mouth fell open. For a moment he felt an overwhelming certainty that the man who had come in here had become a ghost when Fat Johnny's back was turned. It seemed to Fat Johnny that through the man he could see a figure much more real, one of those legendary gunfighters they used to make movies and TV shows about when he was a kid. Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Butch Cassidy, one of those guys. Then his vision cleared and he realized what the crazy nut had done. Taken the cops' guns and strapped them around his waist. With the suit and tie, the effect should have been ludicrous, but somehow it wasn't. The key to the wristband is on the counter. When the posse men wake up, they'll free you. He took the wallet, opened it, and, incredibly, lay 4 $20 bills on the glass before stuffing the wallet back into his pocket. For the ammunition, Roland said. I've taken the bullets from your gun. I intend to throw them away when I leave your store. I think that with an unloaded gun and no wallet, they may find it difficult to charge you with a crime. Fat Johnny gulped. For one of the few times in his life, he was speechless. Now where is the nearest drugstore? Fat Johnny suddenly understood, or thought he understood everything. The guy was a junk ball. Of course, that was the answer. No wonder he was so weird. Probably hopped up to the eyeballs. There's one around the corner, half a block down, 49th. If you're lying, I'll come back and put a bullet in your brain. I'm not lying, Fat Johnny cried. I swear before God the Father. I swear before all the saints. I swear on my mother's... But then the door was swinging shut. Fat Johnny stood for a moment in utter silence, unable to believe the nut was gone. Then he walked as rapidly as he could around the counter and to the door. He turned his back to it and fumbled around until he was able to grasp and turn the lock. He fumbled some more until he had managed to shoot the bolt as well. Only then did he allow himself to slide slowly into a sitting position, gasping and moaning and swearing to God and all his saints and angels that he would go to St. Anthony's this very afternoon, as soon as one of those pigs woke up and let him out of these cups, as a matter of fact. He was going to make confessions, do an act of contrition, and take communion. Fat Johnny Holden wanted to get right with God. This had just been too fucking close. The setting sun became an arc over the western sea. It narrowed to a single bright line which seared Eddie's eyes. Looking at such a light for too long could put a permanent burn on your retinas. This was just one of the many interesting facts you learned in school. Facts that helped you get a fulfilling job like part-time bartender and an interesting hobby like the full-time search for street skags and bucks with which to buy it. Eddie didn't stop looking. He didn't think it was going to matter much longer if he got eye burned or not. He didn't beg the witch woman behind him. First, it wouldn't help. Second, begging would degrade him. He had lived a degrading life. He discovered that he had no wish to degrade himself further in the last few minutes of it. Minutes were all he had left now. That's all there would be before the bright line disappeared and the line of lobstrosities came. He had ceased hoping that a miraculous change would bring Odetta back at the last moment, just as he ceased hoping that Detta would recognize that his death would almost certainly strand her in this world forever. He had believed until 15 minutes ago that she was bluffing. Now, he knew better. Well, it'd be better than strangling an inch at a time, he thought. But after seeing the loathsome lobster thing night after night, he didn't really believe that was true. He hoped he would be able to die without screaming. He didn't think this would be possible, but he intended to try. "They be comin' for you, Honky," Detta screeched. "Be comin' any minute now. Gonna be the best dinner those daddies ever had." It was just a bluff. Odetta wasn't coming back, and the gunslinger wasn't either. This last hurt the most somehow. He had been sure he and the gunslinger had become, well, partners, if not brothers, during their trek up the beach, and Roland would at least make an effort to stand by him, but Roland wasn't coming. Maybe it isn't that he doesn't want to come. Maybe he can't come. Maybe he's dead, killed by a security guard in a drugstore. Shit, that'd be a laugh. The world's last gunslinger killed by a rent-a-cop, or maybe run over by a taxi. Maybe he's dead and the door's gone. Maybe that's why she's not running a bluff. Maybe there's no bluff to run. "Gonna be any minute now," Detta screamed, and then Eddie didn't have to worry about his retinas anymore because the last bright slice of light disappeared, leaving only afterglow. He stared at the waves, the bright after image slowly fading from his eyes, and waited for the first of the lobstrosities to come rolling and tumbling out of the waves. Eddie tried to turn his head to avoid the first one, but he was too slow. It ripped off a swatch of his face with one claw, splattering his left eye to jelly and revealing the bright gleam of bone in the twilight as it asked its question, and the really bad woman laughed. "Stop it," Roland commanded himself, thinking such thoughts is worse than helpless. It is a distraction, and it need not be. There may still be time. And there still was, then. As Roland strode down 49th Street in Jack Mort's body, arms swinging, Bull Shooter's eyes fixed firmly upon the sign which read, "Drugs," oblivious to the stares he was getting and the way people swerved to avoid him. The sun was still up in Roland's world. Its lower rim would not touch the place where the sea met sky for another 15 minutes or so. If Eddie's time of agony was to come, it was still ahead. The gunslinger did not know this for a fact, however. He only knew it was later over there than here, and while the sun should still be up over there, the assumption that time in this world and his own ran at the same speed might be a deadly one, especially for Eddie, who would die the death of unimaginable horror that his mind nevertheless kept trying to imagine. The urge to look back, to see, was almost insurmountable, yet he dared not, must not. The voice of Court interrupted the run of his thoughts sternly. "Control the things you can control, maggot. Let everything else take a flying fuck at you, and if you must go down with your guns blazing." Yes, but it was hard. Very hard sometimes. He would have seen and understood why people were staring at him and then veering away if he had been a little less savagely fixed on finishing his work in this world as soon as he could and getting the hell out, but it would have changed nothing. He strode so rapidly toward the blue sign where, according to the Mortcyclopedia, he could get the Keflex stuff his body needed, and that Mort's suit coat flapped out behind him. In spite of the heavy lead weighting each pocket, the gun belts buckled across his hips were clearly revealed. He wore them not as their owners had, straight and neat, but as he wore his own, crisscrossed and low hung on his hips. To the shoppers, boppers, and hawkers on 49th, he looked much as he had looked to Fat Johnny, like a desperado. Roland reached Cat's drugstore and went in. The gunslinger had known magicians, enchanters, and alchemists in his time. Some had been clever charlatans, some stupid fakes in whom only people more stupid than they were themselves could believe, but there had never been a shortage of fools in the world. So even the stupid fakes survived. In fact, most actually thrived. And a small few actually able to do those things of which men whisper. These few could call demons and the dead, could kill with the curse or heal with strange potions. One of these men had been a creature the gunslinger believed to be a demon himself, a creature that pretended to be a man and called itself Flag. He had seen him only briefly, and that had been near the end, as chaos and the final crash approached his land. Hot on his heels had come two young men who looked desperate and yet grim, men named Dennis and Thomas. These three had crossed only a tiny part of what had been a confused and confusing time in the gunslinger's life, but he would never forget seeing Flag change a man who had irritated him into a howling dog. He remembered that well enough. Then there had been the man in black, and there had been Martin. Martin, who had seduced his mother while his father was away. Martin, who had tried to author Roland's death but had instead authored his early manhood. Martin, who, he suspected, he might meet again before he reached the tower, or at it. One sec. Copper is asking permission to go cuddle with Onyx, and Onyx doesn't quite understand what's happening, so I will be right back and we will continue. I am so sorry. Okay, now I can't decide what he wants. I went to help him, but then he got distracted, so I'm back. Sorry about that. Okay. Where were we? This is only to say that his experience of magic and, magicians had led him to expect something quite different than what he did find in the cat's drugstore. He had anticipated a dim, candlelit room full of bitter fumes, jars of unknown powders and liquids, and filters, many covered with a thick layer of dust or spun about with centuries' cobwebs. He expected a man and a cow, a man who might be dangerous. He saw people moving about inside through the transparent plate glass windows as casually as they would in any shop and believed they must be an illusion. They weren't. So for a moment the gunslinger merely stood inside the door, first amazed, then ironically amused. Here he was in a world which struck him dumb with fresh wonders, seemingly at every step. A world where carriages flew through the air and Paper seemed as cheap as sand, and the newest wonder was simply that for these people, wonder had run out. Here, in a place of miracles, he saw only dull faces and plodding bodies. There were thousands of bottles. There were potions, there were filters, but the Mortcyclopedia identified most as quack remedies. Here was a salve that was supposed to restore fallen hair but would not. There a cream which promised to erase unsightly spots on the hands and arms but lied. Here were the cures for things that needed no curing. Things to make your bowels run or stock them up, or to make your teeth white or your hair black. Things to make your breath smell better. As if you could not do that by chewing alder bark. No magic here, only trivialities. Although there was Aston, and a few other remedies which sounded as if they might be useful, but for the most part, Roland was appalled by the place. In a place that promised alchemy, but dealt more in perfume than potion, was it any wonder that wonder had run out? But when he consulted the Mortcyclopedia again, he discovered that the truth of this place was not just in the things he was looking at. The potions that really worked were kept safely out of sight. One could only obtain these if you had a sorcerer's fiat. In this world, such sorcerers were called doctors, and they wrote their magic formula on sheets of paper which the Mortcyclopedia calls rexes. The gunslinger didn't know the word. He supposed he could have consulted further on the matter, but didn't bother. He knew what he needed, and a quick look into Mortcyclopedia told him where in the store he could get it. He strode down one of the aisles toward a high counter with the words, "Prescriptions filled," over it. The cats who had opened Cat's Pharmacy and Soda Fountain, Sundries, and Notions for Mrs. and Misters on 49th Street in 1927 was long in his grave, and his only son looked ready for his own. Although he was only 46, he looked 20 years older. He was balding, yellow-skinned, and frail. He knew people said he looked like death on horseback, but none of them understood why. "Take this crotch on the phone now," Mrs. Rathbun, ranting that she would sue him if he didn't fill her goddamn Valium prescription, and right now, right this very instant. "What do you think, lady? I'm going to pour a stream of blue bombers through the phone." If he did, she would at least do him a favor and shut up. She would just tip the receiver up over her mouth and open wide. The thought raised a ghostly grin which revealed his sallow dentures. "You don't understand, Mrs. Rathbun," he interrupted after he had listened to a full minute, timed it with the sweep second hand of his watch, of her raving. He would like just once to be able to say, "Stop shouting at me, you stupid crotch. Shout at your doctor. He's the one who hooked you on that shit, right? Damn quacks gave it out like it was bubble gum, and when they decided to cut off the supply, who got hit with the shit? The Sawbones. Oh no? No. He did." "What do you mean? I don't understand." The voice in his ear was like an angry wasp buzzing in a jar. "I understand I do a lot of business at your tacky drugstore. I understand I've been a loyal customer all these years. I understand you'll have to speak to—" He glanced at the crotch's Rolodex card through his half glasses again. "Dr. Brumhall, Mrs. Rathbun. Your prescription has expired. It's a federal crime to dispense Valium without a prescription. And it ought to be one to prescribe it in the first place. Unless you're going to give the patient you're prescribing it for your unlisted number with it, that is," he thought. "It was an oversight," the woman screamed. Now there was a raw edge of panic in her voice. Eddie would have recognized that tone at once. It was the call of the wild junk bird. "Then call him and ask him to rectify it," Kat said. "He has my number." Yes, they all had his number. That was precisely the trouble. He looked like a dying man at 46 because of the Furschlugener doctors. That's a weird word. Okay. "And all I have to do to guarantee that the last thin edge of profit I am somehow holding on to in this place will melt away is to tell all of these junky bitches to go fuck themselves. That's all. I can't call him, she screamed, her voice drilled painfully into his ear. Him and his fag boyfriend are on vacation someplace, and no one will tell me where. Katz felt acid seeping into his stomach. He had 2 ulcers, one healed, the other currently bleeding, and women like this bitch were the reason why. He closed his eyes. Thus he did not see his assistant stare at the man in the blue shirt and the gold-rimmed glasses approaching the prescription counter, nor did he see Ralph, the fat old security guard Katz paid the man a pittance, but still bitterly resented the expense. His father had never needed a security guard, but his father, God rot him, had lived in a time when New York had been a city instead of a toilet bowl, suddenly came out of his usual dim daze, and reached for the gun on his hip. He heard a woman scream, but thought it was because she had just discovered all the Revlon was on sale. He'd been forced to put the Revlon on sale because that putz, Dollance, up the street was undercutting him. One moment. He was thinking of nothing but Dollance and this bitch on the phone as the gunslinger approached like fated doom, thinking of how wonderful the two of them would look naked, save for a coating of honey and staked over ant hills in the burning desert sun, his and hers ant hills. Wonderful. He was thinking this was the worst it could get, the absolute worst. His father had been so determined that his only son would follow in his footsteps that he had refused to pay for anything but a degree in pharmacology. And so he had followed in his father's footsteps, and God wrought his father, for this was surely the lowest moment in a life that had been full of low moments, a life which had made him old before his time. This was the absolute nadir, or so he thought, with his eyes closed. If you come by, Mrs. Rathbun, I could give you a dozen 5 milligram Valium. Would that be all right? The man sees reason. Thank God the man sees reason. And she hung up, just like that. Not a word of thanks. But when she saw the walking rectum that called itself a doctor again, she would just about fall down and polish the tips of his Gucci loafers with her nose. She would give him a blowjob. She would, Mr. Katz, his assistant said in a voice that sounded strangely winded, I think we have a There was another scream. It was followed by the crash of a gun, startling him so badly. He thought for a moment his heart was simply going to utter one monstrous clap in his chest and then stop forever. He opened his eyes and stared into the eyes of the gunslinger. Katz dropped his gaze and saw the pistol in the man's fist. He looked left and saw Ralph, the guard, nursing one hand and staring at the thief with eyes that seemed to be bugging out of his face. Ralph's own gun, the .38, which he had toted dutifully through the 18 years as a police officer, and which he had only fired from the line of the 23rd Precinct basement target range. He said he had drawn it twice in the line of duty, but who knew? Was now a wreck in the corner. I want Keflex, the man with the bull shooter eyes said expressionlessly. I want a lot. Now. And never mind the wrecks. For a moment, Katz could only look at him, his mouth open, his heart struggling in his chest, his stomach a stickly boiling pot of acid. Had he thought he had hit rock bottom? Had he really? You don't understand, Katz managed at last. His voice sounded strange to himself, and there was really nothing very odd about that, since his mouth felt like a flannel shirt and his tongue like a strip of cotton batting. There is no cocaine here. It's not a drug which is dispensed under any I didn't say cocaine, the man in the blue suit and gold-rimmed glasses said. I said Keflex. That's what I thought you said, Katz almost told this crazy momser, and then decided that might provoke him. He had heard of drugstores getting held up for speed, for bennies, for half a dozen other things, including Mrs. Rathbun's precious Valium, but he thought this might be the first penicillin robbery in history. The voice of his father, God rot the old bastard, told him to stop dithering and gawping and do something, but he could think of nothing to do. The man with the gun supplied him with something. Move, the man with the gun said. I'm in a hurry. How much do you want? Katz asked, his eyes flickering momentarily over the robber's shoulder, and he saw something he could hardly believe. Not in this city, but it looked like it was happening anyway. Good luck. Katz act. Oh, hold on. One moment. Okay. The puppy wants to cuddle, and Onyx is old and grumpy, and every time the puppy goes up there all excitedly, she thinks the puppy wants to pounce on her, and she gets upset. Then he gets scared, and it's a whole thing. And I have to go in there and be like, you can both lay down. It's okay. Sorry about that. Where were we? Um. His eyes flickered momentarily over the robber's shoulder, and he saw something he could hardly believe. Not in this city, but it looked like it was happening anyway. Good luck? Katz actually has some good luck that you could put in the Guinness Book of World Records. I don't know, the man with the gun said. As much as you can put in a bag, a big bag. And with no warning at all, he whirled, and the gun in his fist crashed again. A man bellowed. Plate glass blew onto the sidewalk and the street in a sparkle of shards and splinters. Several passing pedestrians were cut, but none seriously. Inside Katz's drugstore, women, and not a few men, screamed. The burglar alarm began its own hoarse bellow. What is going on in there? Let me go make sure the puppy's not torturing the old girl. One sec. I don't know what her deal is. Okay, sorry about that. They're being extra right now. And I just took them on a walk and everything. um, Several passing pedestrians were cut, but none seriously. Inside Katz's drugstore, women, and not a few men, screamed. The burglar alarm began its own hoarse bellow. The customers panicked and stampeded toward and out the door. The man with the gun turned back to Katz, and his expression had not changed at all. His face wore the same look of frightening, but not inexhaustible, patience that it had worn from the first. Do as I say, rapidly. I'm in a hurry. Katz gulped. Yes, sir, he said. The gunslinger had seen and admired the curved mirror in the upper left corner of the shop, while he was still halfway to the counter behind which they kept the powerful potions. The creation of such a curved mirror was beyond the ability of any craftsman in his own world, as things were now, although there had been a time when such things, and many of the others he had seen in Eddie and Odetta's world, might have been made. He had seen the remains of some in the tunnels under the mountains, and he had seen them in other places as well. Relics as ancient and mysterious as the druid stones that sometimes stood in the places where demons came. He also understood the mirror's purpose. He had been a bit late seeing the guards move. He was still discovering how disastrously the lenses Mort wore over his eyes restricted his peripheral vision, but he'd still time to turn and shoot the gun out of the guard's hand. It was a shot Roland thought as nothing more than routine, although he needed to hurry a little. The guard, however, had a different opinion. Ralph Lennox would swear to the end of his days that the guy had made an impossible shot, except Maybe on those old kiddie western shows like Annie Oakley. Thanks to the mirror, which had obviously been placed where it was to detect thieves, Roland was quicker dealing with the other one. Apparently, Nix and the neighbor dog are trading stories again. He had seen the alchemist's eyes flick up and over his shoulder for a moment, and the gunslinger's own eyes had immediately gone to the mirror. In it, he saw a man in a leather jacket moving up the center aisle behind him. There was a long knife in his hand, and no doubt visions of glory in his head. The gunslinger turned and fired a single shot, dropping the gun to his hip, aware that he might miss with the first shot because of his unfamiliarity with this weapon, but unwilling to injure any of the customers standing frozen behind the would-be hero. Better to have to shoot twice from the hip, firing slugs, than that would do the job while traveling on an upward angle that would protect the bystanders, than to perhaps kill some lady whose only crime had been picking the wrong day to shop for perfume. The gun had been well cared for. Its aim was true. Remembering the podgy, under-exercised looks of the gunslingers he had taken these weapons from, it seemed that they were cared better for the weapons they wore than for the weapons they were. It seemed a strange way to behave, but of course this was a strange world, and Roland could not judge, had no time to judge, come to that. The shot was a good one, chopping through the man's knife at the base of the blade, leaving him holding nothing but the hilt. Roland stared evenly at the man in the leather coat, and something in his gaze must have made the would-be hero remember a pressing appointment elsewhere, for he whirled, dropped the remains of the knife, and joined the general exodus. Roland turned back and gave the alchemist his orders. Any more fucking around and blood would flow. When the alchemist turned away, Roland tapped his bony shoulder blade with the barrel of the pistol. Then the man made a strangled "He" sounded like he turned back at once. "Not you. You stay here. Let your prentice do it." Who? Him. The gunslinger gestured impatiently at the aide. "What should I do, Mr. Katz?" The remains of the aide's teenage acne stood out brilliantly on his white face. "Do what he says, you putz. Fill the order. Keflex." The aide went to one of the shelves behind the counter and picked up a bottle. Turned it so I Turn it so I may see the words writ upon it," the gunslinger said. The aide did. Roland couldn't read it. Too many letters were not of his alphabet. He consulted the Mortcypedia. Keflex, it confirmed, and Roland realized even checking had been a stupid waste of time. He knew he couldn't read everything in this world, but these men didn't. "How many pills in that bottle?" "Well, they're capsules, actually," the aide said nervously. "If it's a cylindrug in a pill form you're interested in, never mind all that. How many doses?" "Oh, the flustered aide looked at the bottle and almost dropped it. 200. Roland felt much as he had when he discovered how much ammunition could be purchased in this world for a trivial sum. There had been 9 sample bottles of Keflex in the secret compartment of Enrico Valazar's medicine cabinet, 36 doses in all, and he had felt well again. If he couldn't kill the infection with 200 doses, it couldn't be killed. "Give it to me," the man in the blue shirt said. The aide handed it over. The gunslinger pushed back the sleeve of his jacket, revealing Jack Mort's Rolex. "I have no money, but this may serve as adequate compensation. I hope so, anyway." He turned and nodded toward the guard, who was still sitting on the floor by his overturned stool and staring at the gunslinger with wide eyes, and then walked out. Simple as that. For 5 seconds there was no sound in the drugstore but the bray of the alarm, which was loud enough to blank out even the babble of the people on the streets. "God in heaven, Mr. Katz, what do we do now?" the aide whispered. Katz picked up the watch and hefted it. Gold. Solid gold. He couldn't believe it. He had to believe it. Some madman walked in off the street, shot a gun out of his guard's hand and a knife out of another's, all in order to obtain the most unlikely drug he could think of, Keflex. Maybe $60 worth of Keflex, for which he had paid with a $6,500 Rolex watch. Do? Katz asked. Do? The first thing you do is put that wristwatch under the counter. You never saw it. He looked at Ralph. Neither did you. No, sir, Ralph agreed immediately. As long as I get my share when you sell it, I never saw that watch at all. They'll shoot him like a dog in the street, Katz said, with unmistakable satisfaction. Keflex. And the guy didn't even seem to have the sniffles, the aide said wonderingly. As the sun's bottom arc first touched the western sea in Roland's world, striking bright gold fire across the water to where Eddie lay trussed with a turnkey, officers O'Meara and Delavan were coming groggily back to consciousness in the world from which Eddie had been taken. Let me out of these cuffs, would ya? Fat Johnny asked in a humble voice. Where is he? O'Meara asked thickly and groped for his holster. Gone. Holster, belt, bullets, gun. Oh, shit. He began thinking of the questions that might be asked by the shits in the Department of Internal Affairs, guys who had learned all they knew about the streets from Jack Webb on Dragnet, and the monetary value of his lost gun suddenly became about as important to him as the population of Ireland or the principal mineral deposit of Peru. He looked at Carl and saw Carl had also been stripped of his weapon. Oh, dear Jesus, bring on the clowns, O'Meara thought miserably. And when Fat Johnny asked again if O'Meara would use the key on the counter to unlock the cuffs, O'Meara said, I ought to shoot you in the guts instead. But he couldn't very well shoot Fat Johnny, could he? The guns here were chained down, and the geek in the gold-rimmed glasses, the geek who had seemed so much like a solid citizen, had taken his and Carl's as easily as O'Meara himself might take a pop gun from a kid. Instead of finishing, he got the key and unlocked the cuffs. He spotted the .357 Magnum, which Roland had kicked into the corner, and picked it up. It wouldn't fit in his holster, so he stuffed it in his belt. Hey, that's mine, Fat Johnny bleated. Yeah? You want it back? O'Meara had to speak slowly. His head really ached. At that moment, all he wanted to do was find Mr. Goldrim's specs and nail him to a handy wall with dull nails. I hear they like fat guys like you up in Attica, Johnny. They got a saying, the bigger the cushion, the better the pushin'. You sure you want it back? Fat Johnny turned away without a word, but not before O'Meara had seen the tears welling in his eyes and the wet patch on his pants. He felt no pity. Where is he? Carl Delevan asked in a fury, buzzing voice. He left, Fat Johnny said dully. That's all I know. He left. I thought he was going to kill me. Delavan was getting slowly to his feet. He felt a tacky wetness on the side of his face and looked at his fingers. Blood. Fuck. He groped for his gun and kept groping and hoping long after his fingers had assured him his gun and holster were gone. O'Meara merely had a headache. Delavan felt as if someone had used the inside of his head as a nuclear weapon testing site. Guy took my gun, he said to O'Meara. His voice was so slurry the words were almost impossible to make out. Join the club. He's still here? Delavan took a step toward O'Meara, tilted to his left as if he were on the deck of a ship in a heavy sea, and then managed to right himself. No. How long? Delavan looked at Fat Johnny, who didn't answer, perhaps because Fat Johnny, whose back was turned, thought Delavan was still talking to his partner. Delavan, not a man noted for an even temper or restrained behavior under the best of circumstances, roared at the man, even though it made his head feel like it was going to crack into 1,000 pieces. I asked you a question, you fat shit. How long has that motherfucker been gone? 5 minutes, maybe, Fat Johnny said dully. Took his shells and your guns. He paused. Paid for the shells. I couldn't believe it. 5 minutes, Delavan thought. The guy had come in a cab. Sitting in their cruiser and drinking coffee, they had seen him get out of it. He was getting close to rush hour. Cabs were hard to get at this time of day. Maybe... Come on, he said to George O'Meara. We still got a chance to collar him. We'll want a gun from this slut here. O'Meara displayed the Magnum. At first, Delavan saw 2 of them. Then the image slowly came together. Good. Delavan was coming around. Not all at once, but getting there, like a prize fighter who's taken a damn hard one on the chin. You keep it. I'll use the shotgun under the dash. He started for the door, and this time he did more than reel. He staggered and had to claw the wall to keep his feet. You gonna be all right? O'Meara asked. If we catch him, Delavan said. They left. Fat Johnny was not as glad about their departure as he had been about that of the spook in the blue shirt, but almost. Almost. Delavan and O'Meara didn't even have to discuss which direction the perp might have taken when he left the gun shop. All they had to do was listen to the radio dispatcher. Code 19, she said over and over again. Robbery in progress. Shots fired. Code 19. Code 19. Location is 395 West 49th, Kratz Drugs. Perpetrator, tall, sandy hair, blue shirt. Shots fired, Delavan thought, his head aching worse than ever. I wonder if they were fired with George's gun or mine, or both. If that shitbag killed someone, we're fucked, unless we get him. Blast off, he said curtly to O'Meara, who didn't need to be told twice. He flipped on the lights and the siren and screamed out into traffic. It was knotting up already, rush hour starting, and so O'Meara ran the cruiser with 2 wheels in the gutter and 2 on the sidewalk, scattering pedestrians like quails. He clipped the rear fender of a produce truck sliding onto 49th. Ahead, he could see twinkling glass on the sidewalk. They could both hear the strident bray of the alarm. Pedestrians were sheltering in doorways and behind piles of garbage, but residents of the overhead apartments were staring out eagerly, as if this was a particularly good TV show or a movie you didn't have to pay to see. The block was devoid of automobile traffic. Cabs and commuters alike had scattered. I just hope he's still there, Delavan said, and used a key to unlock the short steel bars across the stock and barrel of the pump shotgun under the dashboard. He pulled it out of its clips. I just hope that rotten crotch son of a bitch is still there. What neither understood was that, when you were dealing with the gunslinger, it was usually better to leave bad enough alone. When Roland stepped out of the Cat's Drugs with the big bottle of Keflex, had joined the cartons of ammo in Jack Mort's coat pockets. He had Carl Delavan's Service 38 in his right hand. It felt so damn good to hold a gun in a whole right hand. He heard the siren and saw the car roaring down the street. Them, he thought. He began to raise the gun and then remembered. They were gunslingers. Gunslingers doing their duty. He turned and went back into the alchemist shop. Hold it, motherfucker, Delavan screamed. Roland's eyes flew to the convex mirror in time to see one of the gunslingers, the one whose ear had bled, leaning out of the window with the scatter rifle. As his partner pulled their carriage to a screaming halt that made its rubber wheels smoke on the pavement, he jacked a shell into its chamber. Roland hit the floor. Katz didn't need any mirror to see what was about to happen. First, the crazy man. Now, the crazy cops. Oy vey. Drop! He screamed to his assistant and to Ralph, the security guard, and then fell to his knees behind the counter without waiting to see if they were doing the same or not. Then a split second before Delavan's triggered the shotgun, his assistant dropped on top of him like an eager tackle sacking the quarterback in a football game, driving Cat's head against the floor and breaking his jaw in 2 places. Through the sudden pain which went roaring through his head, he heard the shotgun blast, heard the remaining glass in the window shatter, along with bottles of aftershave, cologne, perfume, mouthwash, cough syrup, God knew what else. 1,000 conflicting smells rose, creating one hell stench, and before he passed out, Katz again called upon God to rot his father for chaining this curse of a drugstore to his ankle in the first place. Roland saw bottles and boxes fly back in a hurricane of shot. A glass case containing timepieces disintegrated. Most of the watches inside also disintegrated. The pieces flew backwards in sparkling cloud. They can't know if there's still innocent people in here or not, he thought. They can't know, and yet they used a scatter rifle, just the same. It was unforgivable. He felt anger and suppressed it. They were gunslingers. Better to believe their brains had been addled by the head knocking they'd taken than to believe they'd done such a thing knowingly, without a care for whom they might hurt or kill. They would expect him to either run or shoot. Instead, he crept forward, keeping low. He lacerated both hands and knees on shards of broken glass. The pain brought Jack Mort back to consciousness. He was glad Mort was back. He would need him. As for Mort's hands and knees, he didn't care. He could stand the pain easily, and the wounds were being inflicted on the body of a monster who deserved no better. He reached the area just under what remained of the plate glass window. He was to the right of the door. He crouched there, body coiled. He holstered the gun which had been in his right hand. He would not need it. "What are you doing, Carl?" O'Meara screamed. In his head, he suddenly saw a Daily News headline: "Cop kills 4 in West Side drugstore snafu." Delavan ignored him and pumped a fresh shell into the shotgun. "Let's go get this shit." It happened exactly as the gunslinger had hoped it would. Furious at being effortlessly fooled and disarmed by a man who probably looked to them no more dangerous than any of the other lambs on the street of this seemingly endless city, still groggy from the head knocking, they rushed in with the idiot who had fired the scatter rifle in the lead. They ran slightly bent over like soldiers charging an enemy position, but that was the only concession they made to the idea that their adversary might still be inside. In their minds, he was already out the back and fleeing down an alley. So they came crunching over the sidewalk glass, and when the gunslinger with the scatter rifle pulled open the glassless door and charged in, the gunslinger rose, his hands laced together in a single fist, and brought it down on the nape of the officer Carl Devlin's neck. While testifying before the investigation committee, Delavan would claim he remembered nothing at all after kneeling down in Clements and seeing the perp's wallet under the counter. The committee members thought such amnesia, under the circumstances, was pretty damn convenient, and Delavan was lucky to get off with a 60-day suspension without pay. Roland, however, would have believed, and under different circumstances, if the fool hadn't discharged a scatter rifle into a store which might have been full of innocent people, for instance, even sympathized. When you got your skull busted twice in half an hour, a few scrambled brains were to be expected. As Delavan went down, suddenly as boneless as a sack of oats, Roland took the scatter rifle from his relaxing hands. "Hold it!" O'Meara screamed, his voice a mixture of anger and dismay. He was starting to raise Fat Johnny's magnum, but it was as Roland had suspected. The gunslingers of this world were pitifully slow. He could not have shot O'Meara. He could have shot O'Meara 3 times, but there was no need. He simply swung the scattergun in a strong climbing arc. There was a flat smack as the stock connected with O'Meara's left cheek, the sound of a baseball bat connecting with a real steamer of a pitch. All at once, O'Meara's entire face from the neck on down moved 2 inches to the right. It would take 3 operations and 4 steel pegs to put him together again. He stood there for a moment, unbelieving, and then his eyes rolled up the whites. His knees unhinged, and he collapsed. Roland stood in the doorway, oblivious to the approaching sirens. He broke the scatter rifle, then worked the pump action, ejecting all the fat red cartridges onto Delavan's body. That done, he dropped the gun itself onto Delavan. "You're a dangerous fool who should have been sent west," he told the unconscious man. "You have forgotten the face of your father." He stepped over the body and walked to the gunslinger's carriage, which was still idling. He climbed in the door on the far side and slid behind the driving wheel. "Can you drive this carriage?" he asked the screaming, gibbering thing that was Jack Mort. He got no coherent answer. Mort just went on screaming. The gunslinger recognized this as hysteria, but one which was not entirely genuine. Jack Mort was having hysterics on purpose, as a way of avoiding any conversation with this weird kidnapper. "Listen," the gunslinger told him. "I only have time to say this, and everything else, once. My time has grown so very short. If you don't answer my question, I'm going to put your right thumb into your right eye. I'll jam it in as far as it will go, and then I'll pull your eyeball right out of your head and wipe it on the seat of this carriage like a booger. I can get along with one eye just fine, and, after all, it isn't as if it were mine." One sec. "Copper, can All right, I brought him in here with me, so he may get a little whiny, but the old girl will not get as testy. So hopefully we can finish this quickly. All right. Um, he could no more have lied to Mort than Mort could have lied to him. The nature of their relationship was cold and reluctant on both their parts. Yet it was much. Yet it was as much. Wait, what? Yet it was as much more intimate than the most passionate act of sexual intercourse would have been. This was, after all, not a joining of bodies, but the ultimate meeting of minds. He meant exactly what he said, and Mort knew it. The hysterics stopped abruptly. I can drive it, Mort said. It was the first sensible communication Roland had gotten from Mort since he had arrived inside the man's head. Then do it. Where do you want me to go? Do you know a place called the Village? Yes. Go there. Where in the village? For now, just drive. We'll be able to go faster if I use the siren. Fine. Turn it on. Those flashing lights, too. For the first time since he had seized control of him, Roland pulled back a little and allowed Mort to take over. When Mort's head turned to inspect the dashboard of Delavan's and O'Meara's blue and white, Roland watched it turn but did not initiate the action. But if he had been a physical being instead of only his own disembodied Ka, he would have been standing on the balls of his feet, ready to leap forward and take control again at the slightest sign of mutiny. Hopper, what is your deal? There was none, though. This man had killed and maimed God knew how many innocent people, but he had no intention of losing one of his own precious eyes. He flicked switches, pulled a lever, and suddenly they were in motion. The siren whined, and the gunslinger saw red pulses of light kicking off the front of the carriage. Drive fast, the gunslinger commanded grimly. What? Well, leave her alone then. Okay. He has so much energy, you guys. I apologize. In spite of the lights and sirens and Jack Mort beating steadily on the horn, it took them 20 minutes to reach Greenwich Village in rush hour traffic. In the gunslinger's world, Eddie Dean's hopes were crumbling like dikes in a downpour. Soon they would collapse altogether. The sea had eaten half the sun. Well, Jack Mort said, we're here. He was telling the truth. There was no way he could lie, although to Roland everything here looked just as it had everywhere else. A choke of buildings, people, and carriages. The carriages choked not only the streets, but the air itself with their endless clamor and their noxious fumes. It came, he supposed, from whatever fuel it was they burned. It was a wonder these people could live at all, or the women could give birth to children that were not monsters, like the slow mutants under the mountain. Now where do we go? Mort was asking. This would be the hard part. The gunslinger got ready, as ready as he could, at any rate. Turn off the sirens and the lights. Stop by the sidewalk. Mort pulled the cruiser up beside a fire hydrant. There are underground railways in this city, the gunslinger said. I want you to take me to a station where these trains stop to let passengers on and off. Which one? Mort asked. The thought was tinged with the mental color of panic. Mort could hide nothing from Roland, and Roland nothing from Mort. Not, at least, for very long. Some years ago, I don't know how many, you pushed a young woman in front of a train in one of those underground stations. That's the one I want you to take me to. There ensued a short, violent struggle. The gunslinger won, but it was a surprisingly hard go. In his way, Jack Mort was as divided as Odetta. He was not as schizophrenic as she was. He knew well enough what he did from time to time, but he kept his secret self, the part of him that was the pusher, as carefully locked away as an embezzler might lock away his secret skim. Take me there, you bastard, the gunslinger repeated. He slowly raised the thumb towards Mort's eye again. It was less than half an inch away and still moving in when he gave in. Mort's right hand moved the lever by the wheel again, and they rolled toward the Christopher Street station, where that fabled A train had cut off the legs of a woman named Odetta Holmes some 3 years before. Well, looky there. Foot patrolman Andrew Stoughton said to his partner Norris Weaver as Delavan and O'Meara's blue and white came to a stop halfway down the block. There were no parking spaces, and the driver made no effort to find one. He simply double parked and let the clog of traffic behind him inch its laborious way through the loophole remaining, like a trickle of blood trying to serve a heart hopelessly clogged with cholesterol. Weaver checked the numbers on the side of the right front headlight. 744. Yes, that was the number they'd gotten from dispatch, all right. The flashers were on, and everything looked kosher until the door opened and the driver stepped out. He was wearing a blue suit, all right, but not the kind that came with gold buttons and a silver badge. His shoes weren't police issue either, unless Stoughton and Weaver had missed a memo notifying officers the duty footwear would henceforth come from Gucci. That didn't seem likely. What seemed less likely was that this was the creep who had hijacked the cops uptown. He got out, oblivious to the honkings and cries of protest from the drivers trying to get by him. "God damn," Andy Staunton breathed. "Approach with extreme caution," the dispatcher had said. "This man is armed and extremely dangerous." Dispatchers usually sounded like the most bored human beings on earth. For all Andy Staunton knew, they were. And so the almost odd emphasis this one put on the word extremely had struck to his consciousness like a burr. He drew his weapon for the first time in his 4 years on the force and glanced at Weaver. Weaver had also drawn. The two of them were standing outside a deli about 30 feet from the IRT stairway. They had known each other long enough to be attuned to each other in a way only cops and professional soldiers can be. Without a word between them, they stepped back into the doorway of the delicatessen, weapons pointing upward. "Subway?" Weaver asked. "Yeah." Andy took one quick glance at the entrance. Rush hour was in high gear now, and the subway stairs were clogged with people heading for the trains. "We've got to take him right now, before he can get close to the crowd." "Let's do it." They stepped out of the doorway in perfect tandem. Gunslingers Roland would have recognized at once as adversaries much more dangerous than the first two. They were younger, for one thing, and although he didn't know it, some unknown dispatcher had labeled him extremely dangerous, and to Andy Staunton and Norris Weaver, that made him the equivalent of a rogue tiger. If he doesn't stop the second I tell him to, he's dead, Andy thought. "Hold it!" he screamed, and dropped into a crouch with his gun held out in both hands. Beside him, Weaver had done the same. "Police! Get your hands on your head!" That was as far as he got before the guy ran for the IRT stairway. He moved with a sudden speed that was uncanny. Nevertheless, Andy Stoughton was wired, all his dials turned up to max. He swiveled on his heels, feeling a cloak of emotionless coldness drop over him. Roland would have known this too. He had felt it many times in similar situations. Andy led the running figure slightly, then squeezed the trigger of his .38. He saw the man in the blue shirt spin around, trying to keep his feet. Then he fell to the pavement as commuters who, only seconds ago, had been concentrating on nothing but surviving another trip home on the subway, screamed and scattered like quail. They had discovered there was more to survive than the uptown train this afternoon. "Holy fuck, partner," Norris Wheaton breathed. "You blew him away." "I know," Andy said. His voice didn't falter. The gunslinger would have admired it. "Let's go see who he was." "I'm dead," Jack Mort was screaming. "I'm dead. You've gotten me killed. I'm dead. No," the gunslinger responded. Through slitted eyes, he saw the cops approaching, guns still out, younger and faster than the ones who had been parked near the gun shop. Faster. And at least one of them was a hell of a shot. Morton Roland, along with him, should have been dead, dying, or seriously wounded. Andy Staunton had shot to kill, and his bullet had drilled through the left panel of Mort's suit coat. It had likewise punched through the pocket of Mort's arrow shirt, but that was as far as it went. The life of both men, the one inside and the one outside, were saved by Mort's lighter. Mort didn't spoke, but His boss, whose job Mort had confidently expected to have himself by this time next year, did. Accordingly, Mort had bought a $200 silver lighter at Dunhill's. He did not like every cigarette Mr. Farmingham stuck in his gob when the two of them were together. That would have made him look too much like an ass kisser. Just once in a while. And usually when someone even higher up was present. Someone who could appreciate A. Jack Mort's quiet courtesy and B. Jack Mort's good taste. Doobies covered all the bases. This time, covering the bases saved his life, and Roland's. Stoughton's bullet smashed the silver lighter instead of Mort's heart, which was generic. Mort's passion for brand names, good brand names, stopped mercifully at the skin. He was hurt just the same, of course. When you were hit by a heavy caliber slug, there was no such thing as a free ride. The lighter was driven against his chest hard enough to create a hollow. It flattened and then smashed apart, digging shallow grooves into Mort's skin. One sliver of shrapnel sliced Mort's left nipple almost in two. The hot slug also ignited the lighter's fluid, lighter fluid soaking batting. Nevertheless, the gunslinger lay still as they approached. The one who had not shot him was telling people to stay back. Just stay back, goddammit. I'm on fire, Mort shrieked. I'm on fire. Put it out, put it out, put it out. The gunslinger lay still, listening to the grit of the gunslinger's shoes on the pavement, ignoring Mort's shrieks, trying to ignore the coals suddenly glowing against his chest and the smell of frying flesh. A foot slid beneath his rib cage, and when it lifted, the gunslinger allowed himself to roll boneless onto his back. Jack Mort's eyes were open. His face was slack. In spite of the shattered, burning remains of the lighter, there was no sign of the man screaming inside. Someone muttered. Did you shoot him with a tracer, man? Smoke was rising from the hole in the lapel of Mort's coat in a neat little stream. He was escaping around the edge of the lapel in more untidy blotches. The cops could smell burning flesh as the wadding in the smashed lighters, soaked with Ronson lighter fluid, really began to blaze. Andy Stoughton, who had performed faultlessly thus far, now made his only mistake, one for which court would have sent him home with a fat ear in spite of his earlier admirable performance. Telling him one mistake was all it took to get a man killed most of the time. Stoughton had been able to shoot the guy, a thing no cop really knows if he can do until he's faced with a situation where he must find out, but the idea that his bullet had somehow set this guy on fire filled him with unreasoning horror. So he bent forward to put it out without thinking, and the gunslinger's feet smashed into his belly before he had time to do more than register the blaze of awareness and eyes he would have sworn were dead. Stoughton went flailing back into his partner. His pistol flew from his hand. Wheaton held onto his own, but by the time he had gotten clear of Stoughton, he heard a shot, and his gun was magically gone. The hand it had been in felt numb, as if he had been struck with a very large hammer. The guy in the blue suit got up, looked at them for a moment, and said, "You're good. Better than the others. Let me advise you, don't follow. This is almost over. I don't want to have to kill you." Then he whirled and ran fast for the subway stairs. The stairs were choked with people who had reversed their downward course when the yelling and shooting started, obsessed with that morbid and somehow unique New Yonkers curiosity to see how bad, how many, how much blood spilled on the dirty concrete. Yet somehow, they still found a way to shrink back from the man in the blue suit who came plunging down the stairs. It wasn't much wonder. He was holding a gun, and another was strapped around his waist. Also, he appeared to be on fire. Roland ignored Mort's increasing shrieks of pain as his shirt, undershirt, and jacket began to burn more briskly, as the silver of the lighter began to melt and run down his midsection to his belly in burning tracks. He could smell dirty moving air, could hear the roar of an oncoming train. This was almost the time. The moment had almost come, the moment when he would draw the three or lose it all. For the second time, he seemed to feel worlds tremble and reel about his head. He reached the platform level and tossed the 38 aside. He unbuckled Jack Mort's pants and pushed them casually down, revealing a pair of white underdrawers like a whore's panties. He had no time to reflect on this oddity. If he did not move fast, he would stop worrying about burning alive. The bullets he had purchased would get hot enough to go off, and this body would simply explode. The gunslinger stuffed the boxes of bullets into the underdrawers, took out the bottle of Keflex, and did the same with it. Now the underdrawers bulged grotesquely. He stripped off the flaming suit jacket, but made no effort to take off the flaming shirt. He could hear the train roaring toward the platform, could see its light. He had no way of knowing if it was a train which kept the same route as the one which had run over Odetta, but all the same he did know. In matters of the tower, fate became a thing as merciful as the lighter which had saved his life and as painful as the fire the miracle had ignited. Like the wheels of the oncoming train, it followed a course both logical and crushingly brutal, a course against which only steel and sweetness could stand. He hoiked up Mort's pants and began to run again, barely aware of the people scattering out of his way, as more air fed the fire. First, his shirt collar, and then his hair began to burn. The heavy boxes in Mort's underdrawers slammed against his balls again and again, mashing them. Excruciating pain rose into his gut. He jumped to the turnstile, a man who was becoming a meteor. Put me put me out, Mort screamed. Put me out before I burn up. You ought to burn, the gunslinger thought grimly. What's going to happen to you is more merciful than you deserve. What do you mean? What do you mean? The gunslinger didn't answer. In fact, turned him off entirely as he pelted toward the edge of the platform. He felt one of the boxes of shells trying to slip out of Mort's ridiculous panties and held it with one hand. He sent out every pit of his mental force toward the lady. He had no idea if such telepathic command could be heard, or if the hearer could be compelled to obey, but he sent it just the same, a swift, sharp arrow of thought. The door. Look through the door now, now. Train, train thunder filled the world. A woman screamed, "Oh my God, he's gonna jump!" A hand slapped at his shoulder, trying to pull him back. Then Roland pushed the body of Jack Mort past the yellow warning lines and drove over the edge of the platform. He fell into the path of the oncoming train with his hands cupping his crotch, holding the luggage he would bring back. If that was, he was fast enough to get out of Mort at just the right instant. As he fell, he called her, them, again. Odetta Holmes, Odetta Walker, look now! As he called, as the train bore down upon him, its wheels turning with merciless silver speed, the gunslinger finally turned his head and looked back through the door, and directly into her face. Faces. Both of them. I see both of them at the same time. No! Mort shrieked, and in the last split second before the train ran him down, cutting him in two, not above the knees, but at the waist, Roland lunged at the door and threw it. Jack Mort died alone. The boxes of ammunition and the bottle of pills appeared beside Roland's physical body. His hands clenched spasmodically at them, and then relaxed. The gunslinger forced himself up, aware that he was wearing his sick, throbbing body again, aware that Eddie Dean was screaming, aware that Odetta was shrieking in two voices. He looked only for a moment and saw exactly what he had heard. Not one woman, but two. Both were legless, both dark-skinned, both women of great beauty. Nonetheless, one of them was a hag, her interior ugliness not hidden by her outer beauty, but enhanced by it. Roland stared at these twins, who were not really twins at all, but negatives and positive images of the same woman. He stared with a feverish, hypnotic intensity. Then Eddie screamed again, and the gunslinger saw the lobstrosities tumbling out of the waves and strutting toward the place where Detta had left him, trussed and helpless. The sun was down. Darkness had come. Detta saw herself in the doorway, saw herself through her eyes, saw herself through the gunslinger's eyes, and her sense of dislocation was as sudden as Eddie's, but much more violent. She was here. She was there in the gunslinger's eyes. She heard the oncoming train. Odetta, she screamed, suddenly understanding everything. What she was and when it happened. Dada, she screamed, suddenly understanding everything. What she was and who had done it. A brief sensation of being turned inside out, and then a much more agonizing one. She was being torn apart. Roland shambled down the short slope to the place where Eddie lay. He moved like a man who has lost his bones. One of the lobster things clawed at Eddie's face. Eddie screamed. The gunslinger booted it away. He bent rustily and grabbed Eddie's arm, and he began to drag him backwards, but it was too late. His strength was too little, and they were going to get Eddie. Hell, both of them. Eddie screamed again as one of the lobstrosities asked him, "Did it chick?" and then tore a swatch off his pants and a chunk of meat to go along with it. Eddie tried another scream, but nothing came out but a choked gargle. He was strangling in Detta's knots. The things were all around them, closing in, claws clicking eagerly. The gunslinger threw the last of his strength into a final yank and tumbled backwards. He heard them coming, and them with their hellish questions and clicking claws. Maybe it wasn't so bad, he thought. He had staked everything, and that was all he had lost. The thunder of his own guns filled him with stupid wonder. The two women lay face to face, bodies rising like snakes about to strike. Fingers with identical prints locked around each other's throats, marked with identical lines. The woman was trying to kill her, but the woman was not real, no more than the girl had been real. She was a dream created by a falling brick. But now the dream was real. The dream was clawing at her throat and trying to kill her as the gunslinger tried to save his friend. The dream made real was screeching obscenities and raining hot spittle into her face. I took the blue plate because that woman landed me in the hospital. And besides, I didn't get no fourth special plate, and I bust it 'cause it needed bustin', and when I saw a white boy I could bust, why, I bust him too. I hurt the white boys because they needed hurtin'. I stole from the stores that only sell things that are for special to white folks, while the brothers and sisters go hungry in Harlem and the rats eat their babies. I'm the one, you bitch. I'm the one. I, I. Kill her, Odetta thought. She knew she could not. She could no more kill the hag and survive than the hag could kill her and walk away. They could choke each other to death while Eddie and the Roland really bad man, one who had called them, were eaten alive down there by the edge of the water. That would finish all of them. Or she could love, hate, let go. Odetta let go of Detta's throat, ignored the fierce hands throttling her, crushing her windpipe. Instead of using her own hands to choke, she used them to embrace the other. No, you bitch, Detta screamed, but that scream was infinitely complex, both hateful and grateful. No, you leave me alone! You just leave me. Odetta had no voice with which to reply. As Roland kicked the first attacking lobstrosity away, and as the second moved in to lunch on a chunk of Eddie's arm, she could only whisper in the witch woman's ear, "I love you." For a moment the hands tightened into a killing noose, and then loosened. We're gone. She was being turned inside out again, and then suddenly, blessedly, she was whole. For the first time since a man named Jack Mort had dropped a brick on the head of a child who was only there to be hit because a white taxi driver had taken one long look and driven away. And had not her father, in his pride, refused to try again for fear of a second refusal? She was whole. She was Odetta Holmes. But the other? "Hurry up, bitch," Detta yelled, but it was still her own voice. She and Detta had merged. She had been one. She had been two. Now the gunslinger had drawn a third from her. "Hurry up, or they gonna be dinner." She looked at the shells. There was no time to use them. By the time she had his guns reloaded, it would be over. She could only hope. But is there anything else? She asked herself and drew, and suddenly her brown hands were full of thunder. Eddie saw one of the lobstrosities loom over his face, its rugose eyes dead yet hideously sparkling with hideous life. Its claws descended toward his face. Dada, it began, and then it was smashed backwards in chunks and splatters. Roland saw one skitter toward his flailing left hand and thought, there goes the other, and then the lobstrosity was a splatter of shell and green guts flying into the dark air. He twisted around and saw a woman whose beauty was heart-stopping, whose fury was heart-freezing. "Come on, Muffaz!" she screamed. "You just come on! You just come for him! I'm gonna blow your eyes right back through your fucking assholes!" She blasted a third one that was crawling rapidly between Eddie's spraddled legs, meaning to eat on him and neuter him at the same time. It flew like a tiddlywink. Roland had suspected they had some rudimentary intelligence. Now he saw the proof. The others were retreating. The hammer of one of the revolvers fell on a dud, and then she blew one of the retreating monsters into gobbets. The others ran back toward the water even faster. It seemed they had lost their appetite. Meanwhile, Eddie was strangling. Roland fumbled at the rope, digging a deep furrow into his neck. He could see Eddie's face melting slowly from purple to black. Eddie's struggling. Eddie's strugglings were weakening. Then his hands were pushed away by stronger ones. "I'll take care of it." There was a knife in his inner hand. His knife. Take care of what? He thought, as his consciousness faded. What is it you'll take care of, now that we're both at your mercy? Who are you? He husked as darkness deeper than night began to take him down. I am 3 women, he heard her say, and it was as if she were speaking to him from the top of a deep well into which he was falling. I who was, I who had no right to be but was. I am the woman you have saved. I thank you, Gunslinger. She kissed him. He knew that. But for a long time after, Roland knew only darkness. Final shuffle. For the first time in what seemed like 1,000 years, the gunslinger was not thinking about the dark tower. He thought only about the deer which had come down to the pool in the woodland clearing. He sighted over the fallen log with his left hand. Meat, he thought, and fired as saliva squirted warmly into his mouth. Missed, he thought, in the millisecond following the shot. It's gone. All my skill, gone. The deer fell dead at the edge of the pool. Soon the tower would fill him again, but now he was only blessed. He only blessed what gods there were that his aim was still true. And the thought of meat and meat and meat. He reholstered the gun, the only one he wore now, and climbed over the log and behind, which he patiently lay as late afternoon drew down to dusk, waiting for something big enough to eat to come to the pool. I am getting well, he thought with some amazement as he drew his knife. I am really getting well. He didn't see the woman standing behind him, watching with assessing brown eyes. They had eaten nothing but lobster meat, and he had drunk nothing but brackish stream water for 6 days following the confrontation at the end of the beach. Roland remembered very little of that time. He had been raving, delirious. He sometimes called Eddie Elaine and sometimes Cuthbert, and always he called the woman Susan. His fever had abated little by little, and they began the laborious trek into the hills. Eddie pushed the woman in the chair some of the time, and sometimes Roland rode in it while Eddie carried her piggyback, her arms locked loosely around his neck. Most of the time, the way made it impossible for either to ride, and that made the going slow. Roland knew how exhausted Eddie was. The woman knew too, but Eddie never complained. They had food. During the days when Roland lay between life and death, smoking with fever, reeling and railing of times long past and people long dead, Eddie and the woman killed again and again and again. By and by, the lobstrosities began staying away from their part of the beach, but by then they had plenty of meat. And when they were at last got into the area where the weeds and slut grass grew, all 3 of them ate compulsively of it. They were starved for greens, any greens, and little by little the sores on their skin began to fade. Some of the grass was bitter, some sweet, but they ate no matter what the taste. Except once. The gunslinger had wakened from a tired doze and seen the woman yanking at a handful of grass he recognized all too well. No, not that, he croaked. Never that. Mark it and remember it. Never that. She looked at him for a long moment and put it aside without asking for explanation. The gunslinger lay back, cold with the coolness of it. Some of the other grasses might kill them, but what the woman had pulled would damn her. It had been devilweed. The Keflex had brought an explosion in his bowels, and he knew Eddie had been worried about that, but eating the grasses had controlled it. Eventually, they had reached real woods, and the sound of the western sea diminished to a dull drone. They heard only when the wind was right. And now, meat. The gunslinger reached the deer and tried to gut it with the knife held between his third and fourth finger of his right hand. No good. His fingers weren't strong enough. He stitched the knife to his stupid hand and managed a clumsy cut from the deer's groin to its chest. The knife let out the steaming blood before it could congeal in the meat and spoil it. It was still a bad cut. A puking child could have done better. You are going to learn to be smart, he told his left hand, and prepared to cut again, deeper. Two brown hands closed over his one and took the knife. Roland looked around. I'll do it, Susanna said. Have you ever? No, but you'll tell me how. All right. Meat, she said, and smiled at him. Yes, he said, and smiled back. Meat. What's happening? Eddie called. I heard a shot. Thanksgiving's in the making, she called back. Come help. Later, they ate like two kings and a queen as the gunslinger drowsed toward sleep, looking up at the stars, feeling the clean coolness in this upland air. He thought that this was the closest he had come to contentment in too many years to count. And he slept and dreamed. It was the tower, the dark tower. It stood on the horizon of a vast plain, the color of blood in the violet setting of a dying sun. He could see the stars which spiraled up and up within its brick shell, but he couldn't see the stairs which spiraled up and up and up within its brick shell, but he could see the windows which spiraled up along this staircase's way, and he saw the ghosts of all the people he'd ever known pass through them. Up and up they marched, and an arid wind brought him the sound of voices calling his name. Roland, come! Roland, come! Come, come! I come, he whispered, and awoke, sitting bolt upright, sweating and shivering as if the fever still held his flesh. Roland? Eddie? Yes. Bad dream? Bad. Good. Dark. The tower? Yes. They looked toward Susanna, but she slept on, undisturbed. Once there had been a woman named Odetta, Susanna Holmes. Later, there had been another named Detta Susanna Walker. Now there was a third, Susanna Dean. Roland loved her because she would fight and never give in. He feared for her because he knew he would sacrifice her, Eddie as well, without a question or a look back. For the tower, the goddamned tower. Time for a pill, Eddie said. I don't want them any more. Take it and shut up. Roland swallowed it with cold stream water from one of the skins, then burped. He didn't mind. It was a meaty burp. Eddie asked, Do you know where we're going? To the tower. Well, yeah, Eddie said, but that's like being some ignoramus from Texas without a road map saying he's going to Aiken, asshole, Alaska. Where is it? Which direction? Bring me my purse. Eddie did. Susanna stirred and Eddie paused, his face red plains and black shadows in the dying embers of the campfire. When she rested easy again, he came back to Roland. Roland rummaged in the purse, heavy now with shells from the other world. It was short enough work to find what he wanted and what remained of his life. The jawbone. The jawbone of the man in black. "We'll stay here a while," he said, "and I'll get well." "You'll know when you are?" Roland smiled a little. The shakes were abating, the sweat drying in the cool night breeze, but still in his mind he saw those figures. Those knights and friends and lovers and enemies of old circling up and up and up, seen briefly in those windows and then gone. He saw the shadow of the tower in which they were pent struck black and long across a plain of blood and death and merciless trial. "I won't," he said, and nodded at Susanna, "but she will." "And then?" Roland held up the jawbone of Walter. This one spoke. He looked at Eddie. "It will speak again. It's dangerous." Eddie's voice was flat. "Yes." "Not just to you." "No." "I love her, man." "Yes." "If you hurt her, I'll do what I need to," the gunslinger said. "And we don't matter, is that it?" "I love you both." The gunslinger looked at Eddie, and Eddie saw that Roland's cheek glistened red in what remained of the campfire's embered dying glow. He was weeping. "That doesn't answer the question. You'll go on, won't you?" "Yes." "To the very end." "Yes, to the very end." "No matter what." Eddie looked at him with love and hate and all the aching dearness of one man's dying, hopeless, helpless reach for another man's mind and will and need. The wind made the trees moan. "You sound like Henry, man." Eddie had begun to cry himself. He didn't want to. He hated to cry. He had a tower, too, only it wasn't dark. "Remember me telling you about Henry's tower? We were brothers, and I guess we were gunslingers. We had his white tower, and he asked me to go after it with him. The only way he could ask. So I saddled up, because he was my brother, you dig? We got there, too. Found the white tower, but it was poison. It killed him. It would have killed me. You saw me. You saved more than my life. You saved my fucking soul." Eddie held Roland and kissed his cheek, tasted his tears. "So what? Saddle up again? Go on and meet the man again?" The gunslinger said not a word. "I mean, we haven't seen many people, but I know they're up ahead, and whenever there's a tower involved, there's a man. You wait for the man because you gotta meet the man, and in the end, money talks and bullshit walks, or maybe here it's bullets instead, bucks, and that do the talking. So is that it? Saddle up, go meet the man, because if it's just a replay of the same old shitstorm, you two should have left me for the lobsters." Eddie looked at him with dark, ringed eyes. "I've been dirty, man. If I found out anything, it's that I don't want to die dirty." "It's not the same." "No? You're going to tell me you're not hooked?" Roland said nothing. "Who's going to come through some magic door and save you, man? Do you know?" "I do. No one. You drew all you could draw. Only thing you can draw from now on is a fucking gun. Because that's all you got left, just like Balazar." Roland said nothing. "You want to know the only thing my brother ever had to teach me?" His voice was hitched and thick with tears. "Yes," the gunslinger said. He leaned forward, his eyes intent upon Eddie's eyes. "He taught me if you kill what you love, you're damned." "I'm damned already," Roland said calmly. "But perhaps even the damned may be saved." "Are you going to get all of us killed?" Roland said nothing. Eddie seized the rags of Roland's shirt. "Are you going to get her killed?" "We all die in time," the gunslinger said. "It's not just the world that moves on. He looked squarely at Eddie, his faded blue eyes almost the color of slate in this light. But we will be magnificent. He paused. There's more than a world to win, Eddie. I would not risk you and her. I would not have allowed the boy to die if that was all there was. What are you talking about? Everything there is, the gunslinger said calmly. We are going to go, Eddie. We are going to fight. We are going to hurt. And in the end, we will stand. Now it was Eddie who said nothing. He could think of nothing to say. Roland gently grasped Eddie's arm. Even the damned love, he said. Eddie eventually slept beside Susanna. The third Roland had drawn to make a new 3. But Roland sat awake and listened to voices in the night while the wind dried the tears on his cheeks. Damnation, salvation, the tower. He would come to the dark tower, and there he would sing their names. There he would sing their names, and there he would sing all their names. The sun stained the east a dusky rose, and at last Roland, no longer the last gunslinger, but one of the last 3, slept and dreamt his angry dreams, through which there ran only that one soothing blue thread. There I will sing all their names. And that was the end of book 2, The Drawing of the 3. Next time, we will start on, I want to say, book 3 is called The Wastelands. Yep, it is The Wastelands. We will start on The Wastelands next week. Thank you all for being patient with all the issues last week. Thank you all for being even more patient when I took last week's down and did not get to re-record it until this morning. I don't know when the next time I'm going to stream is going to be. It may be a while because I had a lot of stuff, a lot more unexpected stuff pop up. It has been the year of unexpected pop-ups, and so yeah, I'm going to be looking at some recovery times that I wasn't expecting. That is okay though. I don't think any of these specific recoveries will mean that I can't read. However, it may mean that I'm not up for just chatting as much, because it's kind of been stressful lately. You guys know that I don't like being up here by myself. I don't like monologuing. Again, as we all know, that's how book club accidentally started, right? I hate monologuing. And so, like, if there's something planned and like people are going to be around, I might sporadically stream one day. But outside of that, like, I don't we will regularly get back to streaming at some point. It just doesn't look like it's going to be as soon as I thought, as soon as I wanted, or as soon as I expected. So I'm sorry about that. Like I said, there might be 1 or 2 here or there. But it looks like until January, at least, they're going to be a sporadic thing and not a regular thing. However, we will still be continuing with book club. It doesn't take much energy on my part. I don't feel like I'm up here monologuing. Yeah, and like I said, I don't have to prepare anything. I don't have to find anything. I don't have to decide what to talk about. I don't have to wonder where everyone's at and if somebody else is busy or any of that. And so I think at least for some back-to-back recoveries that are going to have to be had, that's probably a good thing that I don't try to do that stuff. So again, thank you all. You are all amazing. Thank you for going through this series with me. Yeah, I will see you all next week. So later days, pretty shiny peoples. Don't forget to smile and all that good stuff. Have some fun too. Fun is never bad. Later days.